We are very glad that Professor Ho wants to talk with us about the use of big data and data analytics in the public sector. I think it's very interesting to learn about it, also because we don't have that much experience yet, I think, in this topic. So, Professor Ho, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to come and share with you what we are doing in the US, also what we have learned. First of all, let me make sure I make this disclaimer. When I actually did a project with IBM on big data and analytics, I actually cite Amsterdam as a good example and best practice in my report, and I'll talk a little bit about that report. So I'm not quite sure whether I actually should come and talk about how good the US is. Well, in fact, actually, you should tell me what we should learn from you. And so I hope that this is actually kind of like a good exchange opportunity. And I think there may be something that US is doing that may be interesting to you, but also maybe something that you are doing that actually we should learn about. So I think that will be a good reward for me also when I come and share some insights with you. Again, I'm coming from Kansas, and I've been there for a few years. And we actually emphasize a lot on local government. I don't know, some of you may know about some of our colleagues there, George Fredrickson and Rosemary. They are very good on public management, collaborative management. I have been doing a lot of research on local government, and we are pretty proud of our tradition in local government management, and we work actually with a lot of local officials. And so we'll talk about some of those projects. So what I plan to do in the time frame that I was given to talk a little bit about the big data promises and also some of the potential for this data-driven decision making. And in fact, actually also should thank Martin Dijon to give me this opportunity and connect us so that we have this opportunity. And we were just talking about a project that we're working on performance budgeting. Comparing with different countries, and again, what we see is that this is also part of the big data-driven, performance-driven trend. And so we're also talking about how politics they also change. So you may have data, but if the politics and the context are different, sometimes the data may not be used. And so we'll talk a little bit about the whole context and framework, and then I will share a little bit about what US is doing, some of the local government examples. And then also some challenges, and specifically, I understand that some of you are interested in finance and budgeting, so I have some examples, some projects that I have just finished, and then talk about some implications. So very quickly on the big data concept. So again, you think about all the gadgets and all the tools that we have today, there are a lot of data. So 10 years ago, people say, oh yeah, we want to know something about something. And that time, when we talk about performance measurement, a lot of times we go, well, we have no data. But right now, we have so much data, sometimes we don't even know how to use data. I don't know, again, about your experience in local governments in the Netherlands here. When I work with some local officials, a lot of times they say, yeah, we have data. But then my question is, what do you do with the data? I say, oh, we don't know. We just let the data sit in our server and sit there. So they have so much data. Think about all the gadgets, right? From iPhone to all these sensor, video camera, now we have drone. In the US, again, this is another big story or big governance issue on big data is what do you do with all these gadgets when they collect data? Sometimes the data may not be even collected by the government. And then what do? Do you allow that? Do you not allow that? And who could actually share the data with whom? So a lot of issues that will come back. Again, this is where I think Amsterdam is doing a lot, and quite interestingly, a lot of sensors. The reason I know is because I've been going to some industry meetings, so not just in academic settings, and so they asked me to go to some of these smart city conferences, and I know that IBM and Cisco, at least among all the companies, are working with Amsterdam, and so they like to talk about how great you guys are. And so I would love to learn more from you, what you are doing also. So again, if you actually think about, if you are interested in also sustainability, there are a lot of smart meters, sustainability focus on the data issues. So all these could come together, and in the IBM report that I produced a year ago, I kind of highlight from a public management, public policy perspective, it's not just about collecting a lot of data and then let them sit there, or maybe doing even some analytics. What I argue is that there should be at least, I would say, at least 4 cycles of big data from the public management perspective, from the government perspective. So first of all, you have definitely a lot of the data exercise. And I'm working with some computer science engineers who are really good with algorithms and data. And there are some gadgets and there are some tools that I have no clue what they're talking about. So I just need to, please help me out to do this part. Right? So they're really good with collecting all kinds of data. And one thing about big data is indeed we have all kinds of data. Some of them are structured data, some of them are unstructured data. So for example, some of the text data, social media data, a lot of people now are mining the social media data. But some of my colleagues are trying to also get, for example, video data. So I'm sure you also have the same story here in the US. A lot of intersections have all these video cameras shooting down in the street. And so I work with some of the local officials. What are you doing with all those videos? We don't do anything about the video. So what do you do? Well, we archive it 1 day or 2 in case there's an accident. We'll go back. But most of the time, we just don't do anything about it. So again, you could mine that data. And so there are some companies and also some officials now start to think about, could we use actually real-time algorithm to actually analyze a video to find out actually is it a big truck, is it a small truck, etc. And so that we could then think about transportation planning. But at the same time, there are also some privacy issues about, well, that means you can also read the license plate, or should you read the license plate, etc. Another major issue is about, in the US, is about actually all these police cameras. So again, if you pay attention to the news, these days in the US, one major issue is racial dynamics. And so to protect the citizen, also the police, they have those video cameras on the police now. Supposedly, they should also, the body camera, right? They should turn it on, and if they walk in the scene, they could then actually think about what they then could have archive of what happened, and then they could go back, right? Now, of course, they need to turn it on first. But even if they have turned it on, the question is how long you store the data and what to do with the data. And so we are working with, so we start to actually think about that project. And so again, there are all this big data, right? So everything is digitized. And so a lot of things are digitized. And so we could mine the data, and we could process data, clean the data, and then even use automated computer algorithm to develop. What I will argue is, at the end of it, you do need to have some performance indicators to actually look at what's going on, have some benchmark, have some algorithm to find out whether there's some outliers, etc. So based on that, I would say this is actually just the first part of the big data world in the public sector, at least. And then, importantly, we need to go back to the traditional world of public management, performance budgeting, etc. Is how to include the data back into the program analysis, departmental analysis, and even enterprise-wide or the government-wide analysis to find out what are the policy priorities, what are the key issues in the program, so that we could then do evaluation and then feed it back to the goal setting, budgeting, planning, management, operation management, etc. So that we could then feed it into communication. Another major initiative we are working on with some local officials is, after you get all data, you analyze all this stuff, could you then actually feed the information back through the website, through social media, through app, so that people will be more informed about what's going on in your agency, what you have done, and what you need them to do, right? So the communication engagement side is very important. So I would say this is the whole cycle of decision making using performance information data, data-driven, is still very important. It's just that now we have more tools and more data to play with, right? So this part hasn't changed, but now we have more possibilities. And then I would also argue, and this in the US setting, there's the third cycle that is very important is actually crowdsourcing, or what we call citizen science. After you get the data, sometimes it's still very government-driven. The e-government tradition is still very government-driven. But now people are realizing that, first of all, governments are constrained by budget. You can't do everything. And there are so many technologies that are so new that the officials and even some of the engineers hired by the government do not have enough capacity and time even to handle everything. And so a lot of times we need to outsource it and crowdsource it to citizens and let them see it. And see this is where the open data, I know Martin is working on that, the open data is very important. And so you shoot out the data, after you process it, you actually have look at some of the priorities, etc. You put the data out and say, this is actually where we want citizens to help us out. And so in the IBM report, I also talk about how actually different cities are working with different citizen teams, including the Google volunteers, etc., as to help mine the data and get the insights, and then feed it back into the service and do something about it. And the citizens themselves also may do something about that on their own. Right? So they could use it to check the government, they could also use that to develop apps to generate business opportunities, etc. So that's another cycle, I argued, in the big data world. And finally, of course, ultimately from the government perspective, you do want to use all these insights and citizen insights to enhance your service delivery, produce better outcomes and output, so that you can feed it back into the whole loop again. So the service delivery part is also very important. Yeah.
If I see big data, I see it as a chance for the government. But on the other side, I can also imagine that it's not only a chance, but also an obligation.
Yes.
Because, yeah, that's also what you say with the police cameras.
Yes.
We are obliged to use that.
Yeah.
How do you see that?
Yeah. We'll come back to that, other challenges. Yeah. So keep that thought in mind. But I agree with you. It's very important how to set the boundary and what they should do or should not do. Yeah. So again, this is kind of like what I argue there, like different cycles of big data in this whole decision making. So how well U.S. cities are doing? So a year ago, we did a small study analyzing 65 cities, the largest cities in the U.S., to see what they have been doing. I worked with Bo McCall. He was my MPA student, and now he's actually hired by Kansas City, Missouri, to become one of the performance analysts. And it was funded by IBM. And so we did a lot of survey. We actually talked to people. We also analyzed the website and see what policy and what stuff they have and what apps they have online, etc. So basically, long story short, let me explain what are the key findings. So at that time, now again, these practices evolve every day. Okay, so they've been changing every day. In fact, when we did this study, we looked at what apps how many apps they had, and then 3 months later, we went back, it's already changed. So keep this in mind. These data are old already because these things are evolving so fast every day, every month. So at that time, a lot of cities actually offer some apps. Only 5 or 65 did not have anything at that time. I'm sure that now they all have some apps. But the interesting dilemma, or people are still debating about, is do you want to have 1 or 2 apps, or you want to allow departments to have their own apps? So there's another dilemma that you could think about. So some cities have more, some cities have fewer. For the sensors, again, at that time when we look at a lot of policy documents, what they put online, and also through the newspaper, etc., to find out what they did, a lot of cities actually have the sensor initiatives. Many of them focus on energy, weather, environmental side. Less so, actually interesting enough, less so on smart city buildings themselves. So it's really citizen outward driven, and some of them also focus on transit and transportation stuff. For example, in Kansas City, in my own city, they now have this streetcar, kind of like your rail system, and so a tram system. And now they have actually the sensors to actually count how many people use it and not use it, etc., automatic count. But in fact, they actually did an audit to make sure the sensors actually were correct. And so they actually did a random audit of the counting and see whether indeed the sensors are actually really sensing people, and they find that it's pretty accurate. And so now they could trust the data more, so that they could actually analyze the trend, who were using it, not using it, at what time, etc., and at what point to what point. So now they are doing some of this. And so a lot of cities now start to play with that. Water, sewer is another thing. Some cities actually have sensors in the pipeline to find out whether they have any leaks, etc. So that's another practice. Many cities also have these kind of analytic initiatives. I mentioned to you earlier, some of them actually have partnership with Code for America, which is actually sponsored by Google. And also they have other enterprise-wide analytics, etc. So many are focused on that. One more thing I would like to add is that some cities now actually start to have what they call chief data officer. So many cities for a long time now have chief information officers, the CIO, and then some of them have chief innovation officer. And now some cities actually start to have chief data officer, separate from all those officers. And then you say, why? You know why add another layer? Well, because they find that there are so many departments that have data that sometimes they need some coordination and really think about what to do with data, what not to do with data, especially when you think about how to coordinate also a lot of security issues and privacy issues. So they need to work with departments specific on data. It's beyond innovation, but also not just about IT hardware stuff. So it's really about data strategy. So some citizens are actually chief data officer. One of my former students actually is the chief data officer of Kansas City, and he helped me a lot with this kind of research. And so, and then of course the open data, right? So a lot of them actually have open data platforms. In the US, we noticed that this is actually pushed a lot by companies. Officials want them, citizens, some of them want them, but really the major push is by companies because they really want us to push all the data out so that they can mine the data. They also want you to buy the platform, etc. So a lot of cities are on that, and also a lot of foundations are pushing it. This is about transparency, accountability, right? So out of that, you see that, interesting enough, we still have not seen a lot of collaboration across jurisdiction and also across level of government yet. So if it's about a city data, open data, it's all just about the city. Even in the US, we have the city and county and township, right? Or school district, they're all separate jurisdictions. We haven't seen a lot of cities that are able to actually harness and collect all the data, integrate on one single site yet. And moving towards that direction in some cities, but it's very hard because now you talk about collaborative governance issue, and so we'll come back to that a little bit. At the same time, we also see some cities start to look into data privacy issue. And so going back to the earlier question about what you should do, what you should not do. Some cities are a little bit more progressive and say we need to think about what we should put out there, or what we should collect, or what we should analyze, and what we should not analyze, or what we should not even touch, right? Because this is citizen stuff. And so some cities in the IBM report that I mentioned to you earlier, I really like what Seattle is doing. Seattle actually have put together a citizen committee that consists of professors from UW, University of Washington, and some other groups, and business community, and also citizen representatives, to talk about what they should do or should not do, and set up some privacy governance boundary that will then drive what departments could do or could not do. So I really like that governance mechanism. Texas also have their own internal mechanism to really look at what data they should have from different departments, and they also get some citizen input. So I think that kind of privacy policies, the governance behind it is getting there, but it's still everyone is kind of exploring that a little bit. So we'll come back to that. So I just want to show you some concrete examples. What cities are doing. I really like Los Angeles because they have so much data, but also they are really good with visualizing some of the data. When we work with citizens and work with local officials, we find that in the private sector, they don't do a lot of GIS, Geographical Information System, spatially. When we work with citizens, they love maps. So this is one difference between the private sector and the public sector. When we work with the private sector, or my engineering friends work with private, it's all about analytics, focus on individual customers. For citizens or for government, it's very important to pay attention to where things happen and how they distribute, because that matters to citizens. So you see Los Angeles actually map this out really well. Like for example, they have the streetwise, they talk about where they're going to have maybe some infrastructure plan, future roads, whether they have any walkability issues, and they map these out very beautifully. And they put it on their website, shoot on their app to inform citizens. So I really like what they have done. Beautiful maps. Kansas City, myself, helped a little bit, but mainly driven by a lot of my colleagues there, officials there. They actually have a data-driven approach to think about city services. What I really like about it is not only they have all these administrative data they have, right? They're mining all the data from different departments, police department, the fulfillment one, the service request data, and they actually analyze it, look at the trend, look at outliers, look at every month what's evolving, etc. But by the way, this is actually the project that we look at the evolving police cases. Right? So you see actually in the center, you have a little bit more issues in downtown area, but over time, day by day, you see some involvement. Right? So this is where you can look at the peak, the low, right? Summer, people get out more, they have more drinking at night, and they just let loose a little bit, right? So you see more stuff going on in August, September. But then in the wintertime, we find out that actually, well, it's getting cold. Even some of the thieves or some of the criminals say, it's time to actually lay low a little bit and don't do too much. Right? So there's some seasonality there. And so through big data, you could actually look at that. One thing also about event, you could actually, this is another project we are looking into, is the distribution of activities and how you should actually think internally, how you should allocate your resources, right? In terms of deployment of police, in terms of allocation of tasks, etc. So this is something that we are looking into more. So, and also Google Fiber is another thing, so they have this fast internet cable and they connect to all these sensor. So they're now working with Kansas City as a lab to explore smart city like that. So Kansas City is actually doing a lot of interesting initiatives. Boston is also really nice. So again, they have this new urban mechanics under the mayor's office to drive this data-driven strategy. And so they have developed this app. This particular app is quite interesting. They basically, I don't know about your road, it seems that they're all very nice, but in the US it's not necessarily true in many cities. And so there are potholes, right? These potholes are cracked. And so when you drive, you boom, right? So when we do a lot of citizen surveys, this is number one thing that people really hate. And so Boston, some years ago, developed an app that you could actually hang on your dashboard or hang on the window of the windshield of the drive or the car, and then you sense the bump automatically and find out where you have some issues, and then automatically upload to the city, and then the city could think about whether they should fix that part of the street or city, or prioritize where they should have some pothole problem and fix it, right? So that's really smart. They also have these kind of material one, and you should see that with stray animals, who has lost his dog or cat, you know, I know, and all this stuff. So really cool stuff. What I also like about Boston, another thing is they really engage citizens. So this is one example. They actually did a citizen engagement activities using big data, data-driven app to actually engage some people in Chinatown or Boston. So, and show them some data, ask them what do you think about that, and what would you like to do with that, that kind of thing. So I think it's really cool. And of course, with all the data, they actually went back and do traditional performance management differently. So they score different services, track them day by day and week and month, and see what services are doing okay, whether they are fulfilling the goals, could they do better, etc., and benchmark themselves. So I think it's really nice. Another new way to think about performance management in this big data era. Chicago is another example. They have a lot of data, of course, and they do a lot of algorithm analytics stuff, working with the University of Chicago team and also a science lab in Chicago. And they have all kinds of sensors in downtown area that will sense the weather, pedestrian pattern, Wi-Fi, who is getting Wi-Fi, what they do, etc. Now that gets into some of the privacy issue, but they try to collect it anonymously, so it should be good. So they then actually think about the data and think about what to do with the downtown development. What I like about Chicago is the governance. So they actually have a partnership between the Chicago city government, the MacArthur Foundation in Chicago, funded some of these initiatives, and also the community trust. So it's really a non-profit, public, and also the federal funded sponsored scientific lab, the Urban Lab. And so they really put together a really nice team to think about big data in that way. So I think it's a really good model for cities to think about how to work together. Because of time, I will get into some of the analysis that we have done about these 65 cities. I presented a paper in the HICS, a system science conference several months ago. And I won't give you all the details of that paper, but I just want to summarize for you. If you actually think about big data, we could also apply the traditional institutional public management analysis to think about big data as a new phenomenon, an organizational phenomenon. What do we do with it? So what I argue is that actually there are several layers, logics behind big data, right? So first of all, a lot of times we focus on the characteristics of big data, right? It's about volume of data, variety of data, the velocity of data, etc., right? That has been well established about the characteristics. But also, we just mentioned, talked about what we could do with data, right? So I just talked about how you could integrate our data in decision making, and how you could do customized custom analysis, analogy, and outlier prediction analysis, predictive analytics, pattern recognition, all this stuff. This is good. But what I would like to argue is that behind all the practices, there are also some institutional logics. If you actually really talk to citizens, talk to officials, there are several things I would like to highlight. First, you really have to believe in quantification of decision making. That's one big example. If you don't even believe in that, then you don't believe in big data, right? Because you have to believe that you could quantify a lot of stuff. And some of my colleagues don't believe that, oh, yeah, you can't really get to the truth if you quantify everything. Well, if that's the case, then you have a lot of questions of big data, which is also a legitimate critique or legitimate skepticism. So that's one institutional logic behind it. Second, I also believe that big data will really challenge us to think about the privacy boundary. You have to accept some fuzziness in the privacy boundary. So when we work with citizens, we say, well, you have all this app, right? You have Apple phone, the Android phone, right? So you download all this app, you know that they are collecting all the pictures in your phone, all the contacts in your phone, all this stuff. I said, yeah, okay. So you still use the app, yeah, okay. So they accept it. Then I said, do you mind the government also collect that? No. Okay, so now, how the government would do it or not do it, and should we privatize it, should not? At some point, citizens have to wrestle with that idea, but we know that especially the younger generation, like my children, like teenagers, yeah, so what, right? They know everything about me, yeah, I mean everything on the media, on Facebook, yeah, so what? So there's some fuzziness in that logic that we need to wrestle with. What does that really mean for us in the future? And also, I will also argue another institutional logic behind all the big data governance issue is there are a lot of problem solving for a community and by a community. If you think about what we just talked about, Google is putting together all these citizen teams, right? And all of these volunteers are doing, in the daytime, they actually work with a company, do all this analytic stuff, and then in the evening time, they even get together once a month and say, hey, cities, what do you want to do? We will actually volunteer our time to help you develop some analytics, to help you solve some problems. So there are a lot of new rituals, new cultural values behind this big data world that say we want to use our skills to do something for the community. And finally, you also have to believe that there's some kind of superiority of technology and computing, right? So now again, we'll come back to that. Is that true, or are there some challenges, or are there some boundaries to that? Absolutely. But again, you have to kind of believe in that kind of institutional logic behind this. To actually say, that's why we believe we need to use machine learning, we could ask computers to do all of this stuff for us, right? So if you actually believe in this kind of multi-layer logic, then we could start to analyze how these things influence the progressive of some of the cities. And so again, this paper looked into the 65 cities, and we track how they use some of this stuff. We specifically code the 24 practices, how they use apps and sensors and analytics initiatives, and also open data, and also we talk to some officials. Long story short, we actually clustered and the pattern and find out that there are basically 3 groups of cities in our analysis. Again, hopefully no cities will feel embarrassed if they get in group 2 or 3. I mean, they are all just, these things are evolving, right? But again, based on data, we find that there are 3 groups. So basically, Group 1 and Group 2 are the relatively more progressive. They have more stuff. And Group 3 are kind of catching up, put it that way, right? So then we actually say, okay, what are the drivers? So we find out actually cluster 1 and 2 and 3, what are the drivers behind these cities' usage? Well, lo and behold, indeed, there are actually layers of reasons. First, we find that if the city is in a traditionalistic state culture, this is actually quoted by political scientists in the 1980s, whether that state culture is more traditionalistic versus there are some more progressive state. If they're in the more traditionalistic state culture, in fact, they're actually less progressive. So again, even though technologies are evolved, some institutions are still dictating or framing how we do things, right? So that's one layer of analysis. And also, we find that the network is very important. So the second layer is actually all this multi-jurisdictional network among cities. So Bloomberg, former Mayor Bloomberg of New York City, actually funded an initiative called What Works City. And they basically put all the cities together. If you actually look at the odds ratio is really big. Basically, if you are in the What Works City group, you get a lot of stuff. Well, because they actually work with each other, they share algorithms, they talk about initiatives, they share best practices. So if you actually are in that peer group, either because of peer pressure or because of that image or because of the support, you actually get a lot more stuff going on. Interesting enough, this is what Martin will love. We also find that cities who have actually got performance budgeting, that means they have that data-driven culture originally, they are more into the big data world. Because they have been collecting data, they are more sensitive, they are more open to having data to drive decision making, right? So we find that those cities actually also are more progressive. And then if they also have a team structure, so the organizational structure also matters. If they actually have a team structure to do it, they also are more progressive. And finally, the mayoral form of government also is more progressive. So that means leadership matters. And so these are some of the key findings when we look at why some cities are more progressive or not. So I don't know whether that's true in the observation among all the Dutch cities, why some cities are doing better, some cities are behind. So we can talk about that later. So what are the key challenges? So I will argue that number one is you really need to have good leadership support. And so I have a lot of pictures of Mayor Bloomberg and the mayors of Los Angeles and Boston and Kansas City, the city manager and the mayor work together a lot. So a lot of these city officials are really the key that when we interview our officials, they keep mentioning, oh, because our mayor really are supportive, or because our mayor really want that, right? They are really the key to actually make a difference. And if you actually borrow, going back to the policy innovation literature, that's true. Leadership really comes from 0 to 1. That kickstart momentum really takes a lot of leadership initiative to do it. And so, and I put a halo to Mayor Bloomberg because again, not only did he pushed New York City to do it, he actually now put in money to set up the WorkWorks Foundation, put in money for Harvard and Johns Hopkins to really work with all the cities to do stuff. And so when I work with other cities, they have you heard of WorkWorks City? Are you in that group? And so they really, so he is kind of like a wing leader on all this stuff. And I will also argue that collaborative management is very important. So you have seen what I presented earlier in some of the case studies, how government has to work with the business, has to work with also the community to do things together. Because government may have a lot of data, but it does not have all the data, nor the capacity to analyze all the data. And so really it's a partnership that is really critical. And within the government also, you need to have a lot of collaborative management among departments. Because what we find out when we interview departments, when we talk to them, when we do survey of them, they find out that, yeah, we have a lot of data, but they're all sitting in different silos, different departments. And they have different standards, they use different software and hardware, and how to get them to even agree on something and then share the data. The police may have the data, but they don't want to share with you because they are more protective of it. So that kind of collaborative management is really critical. How to set up a team is really critical.
And
so we find out,
what is the impact of such protectionism? Can you describe it?
Sorry.
Data-driven decision-making needs some openness of relationships.
Yes.
And protectionism might prohibit that.
Yes, yes. So since the departments, some of them in some cities actually are very hesitant to share the data. There are many reasons, right? First, they may say, well, we don't know about the quality of data. But let's clean it up first before we share with you. That's number one. Second, they actually are also afraid of the fact that when we share data, you may know more about our inefficiency or ineffectiveness, and then we may be under pressure. If you also think about some of the stuff that we talk about, well, after you share data with the central government, they may at the end put it in an open data platform to share with the citizen and the public. That's a lot of public pressure. So some of them are hesitant. And also there are some legitimate reasons why they are hesitant. Also, there may be some privacy concern. But police, they say, we can share data with you, but only after we clean it up. Maybe you have to code the addresses in a very fussy way so that you don't okay the names, the address exactly, so that we will be able to let you do the open data. So there are good reasons. There are also some concerns about accountability, etc. There are many reasons to do that. So how we work it together is very important. That's why actually when we talk to citizens, and we talk to local officials, we find that the key players are the chief information officer, because they are the hardware people, right? And also the chief innovation officer, the chief data officer, the GIS team, we find out is really critical, at least in the US. The maps, how you locate our data are very important. And of course, the 311 complaint, the citizen complaint request center, tech companies, universities, civic corporates are all playing a key role. So, if we did a simple survey, and we find that what are the key challenges, if you actually go through the list. So, we have some hardware issues, right? Outdated IT system. Another major issue is actually staff training, because the techniques are so new, a lot of them need to get retraining. But qualified programmers, another major issue, right? And so, and then data quality, get departments to work together somewhat, etc. Right? So you find that a lot of these behind that, you have to actually get departments to work together to solve some of those problems. And so, so that's why collaborative management is key. Now I understand, yeah.
These are the challenges which I also saw in your paper, and which I do not see is the availability of data, but not using it. Is that underneath all these reasons? Is it an underlying factor, or is this because I can't see there's a lot of
data to use the result? Is that what you?
Oh, that's a relatively smaller.
Smaller. I mean, this is smaller than some of these, like the capacity issues. So in the US, because again, in the earlier discussion, I mentioned that performance budgeting is a key driver. So a lot of cities actually have performance management, performance budgeting initiatives already. So they have been using some data. Now, they may not be using analytics or predictive analytics yet, but they have been, some of them at least have the data culture, data-driven culture already. So some of them say, well, we use data, but so that's not a major concern about using data. But a lot of times we want to use it, but we don't have the staff to do it, or we don't have the IT system to do it. So that seems to be the
So the presumption is then if we have the staff, if we train them, then
they will use it in some way, yeah. So, but again, also how they use it, now a lot of times also we need to think about how they use it too. So some of them agree that the major challenge so far is actually on capacity right now. Repercussion, I'm glad that you actually mentioned that. So going to the capacity, we maybe share some insights together. So secret to success, another thing we find is that really technologies are important, but it's also more important to think about how they're related to maybe the larger picture, about management, about learning, about transparency, about accountability, and ultimately it's about quality of life. So it's not just about getting the gadget and getting all the technologies piece. So how you integrate that with city operations and policies are very important. So if you actually pay attention to also the diagram that I presented earlier about the 4 cycles, on top of all the data-driven strategies, I actually put it on top is actually some data governance policies. Because that piece of legislation or those policies should drive what data you should collect, should not collect. So we have to tie all this back to the city policy and operations stuff. And there are a lot of normative boundary of these. So very quickly, on that point, so talk about the challenges. So let me give you one good example. So in the US now, we actually talk about some of the evil of big data. So one good example is actual algorithms, right? We could now actually run our data and find out, okay, certain neighbors have some issues, or certain racial groups are associated with certain phenomena. But then what do you do with that? So are you saying that the race is the cause of that? Absolutely not, right? So, but then what do you do, right? So all the way in terms of like crime, criminal, policing issues, to airport travel, to how you actually deal with algorithm, and there's so much could be hidden in the algorithm that you could actually now get into what they call the data-driven discrimination. It's not about social economics anymore. It could be driven by the data. And that is the scary part. And so Federal Trade Commission just issued something about, hey, businesses, you need to watch out. But even government should be even more important because we do care about those values and the governance issues. So that's one thing. Harvard Business Review actually had an issue in 2014 saying we are entering into a new era of discrimination. So what do we do? And that's why I really like the fact that you need to get citizen voices into this. It's not just about technologies. You get all the computer science folks to drive your decision. That is very dangerous to me. So also we need to think about alignment, right? So for example, you need to think about, okay, after you see our patterns, then could you actually bring it back to the management side, the policy side? So I'll give you an example. This is actually what we analyzed some of the crime data in Kansas City, etc. Right? So you see, I just want to highlight one thing, is that if you actually see the crime, the time frame, you find out that there are more crime issues, more incidents actually during the middle of the day, okay? And also, middle of the day, and also this is month, and you see that again, summer, there's a peak time, right? And also, even in terms of days, you see that even the thieves are resting on Sunday, right? So it's very interesting. And so you could then think about this and say, okay, what do we do? In fact, I joked with my colleagues in Kansas City and said, hey, given this, you better actually put more resources in the summer in terms of policing. Well, in the wintertime, give them some reward, send them in a cruise to go to Bahamas. And then in summer, they come back and work overtime in the summer. No, I'm just kidding. But again, you need to, that means you actually could actually think about the peak and know in your management decision and rethink how resources should be allocated to be more efficient and effective. So again, you need to tie it back. So let me actually conclude then to come back to some big picture issues that I think we haven't resolved yet that we need to. So we have been talking about big data, big trends, etc. But if you actually think about this is really truly big data, right? So many of you have seen this. This is actually the CO2 emission of our world, right? Over time, this is actually about 1,000 years before present, and nothing. And then for the past basically 200 years, shit up. Now that is big data, right? And that's big issue. And how about this, right? Thousands of years, and then industrialization, shut up, right? So this is actually from NASA. Now, again, that goes back to the whole notion, we have data, does that mean that the policymakers need to believe in data and use the data, right? That goes into politics, ideologies, governance issues. But what we've noticed is actually, you see this pattern, and I went to some conferences with some industry people and some academics. What I really find fascinating is that this is something that we actually need to think about in terms of decision making. This is evolution, right? We are pretty good with this kind of data pattern. If it's actually it is a contingent right evolution, right? It's a gradual change over time. We could adapt that. We could use algorithm, find out okay, what we should do differently, and it's a change. What we are not really good at is we have a very stable environment, and all of a sudden there's a sudden change, a paradigm shift, a abrupt change. This kind of rapidly changing environment in a very short period of time is something that we, in public decision making, is not really good at. That citizens are so used to, oh, this is what is going to be the same deal, right? Until something hit, and then we are completely unprepared. Now, how do we use big data to think about this kind of trend and prepare the kind of the black swan issue? And that is something that I think ultimately it really needs to come back to the political system, the decision-making system, and we have to be smart with those kind of stuff to prepare for that kind of thing because of climate change, because of other financial issues. And so let me give you a good example since this is about climate, but I know that many of you are in the finance field. Well, if you actually think about long haul, we actually have a lot of data on financial situation in the US because we actually have accrual financial reports of state and local government. So we actually know how much assets they have and what are the long-term liabilities in a 30 years period of time. So we actually document that, and they are required to report that every year. So for a long time, we actually have data on the long-term liabilities and all the what they call the net assets, the negative net assets. So if you have a lot of pension liabilities, if you actually borrow a lot of money for a long time, you have a huge negative net asset. And so if they actually know to think about this in budgeting, right, they should actually need to think about how they should raise more revenue and cut down spending. But for a long time, we actually just ignore that in the governance and political decision-making process. What will be interesting is, at some point, is it an evolution or is it going to be an abrupt change? So you actually start to hear more news about bankruptcy in the US, right? And so there are a lot more cities, including Chicago and many other cities, are really, state of Illinois, they are actually facing bankruptcy potential. And the state of Illinois could not pass the budget 3 years in a row because they just could not agree on how to solve the problem. So that kind of financial issues will be major. And now, do we lack data? No, we have data. But how do we deal with that data? And that is actually something that we have to think about. So to just conclude, a serious challenge, I think, faced by smart cities or even smart government is that we need to think about the governance structure behind the decision-making mechanism so that it will be more evidence-based for sure, but I think it's also important to be more forward-looking and inclusive and ethical and open, right? So it's not just backward-looking. A lot of analytics is actually backward-looking. What happened? Well, what about, we need to have some analytics to think about forward-looking. What may happen, and are you ready? We haven't got into that world too much. So, and I think also need to think about ethics, where if you have to think about all the algorithms, we just ran that, right? I could tell you the easiest thing when we run all the policing data is highlight the neighborhoods that are minority-driven, low income, they have all the crime. So does that mean that you label all those people and say, we need to catch them, watch them more carefully? Or there are some underlying issues that's not about race. And indeed, we actually went back and looked at the data, and if we control for income, control for education, control for neighborhood characteristics, race become not important anymore. It's really about the socio-economic determinants. Race is just a very little role. But if you actually don't do that, all my computer science friends, if they actually don't think about the social science theories and other social determinants, just run the data to predictive analytics, that's what you may get, race. And so watch those race, right? That has become very problematic. So how you kick in the inclusiveness, how to kick in the ethical boundary of big data is very important. We haven't got that dialogue, I think, enough. And so, of course, how technology may help and sometimes hinder us to do this kind of thing is very important. So I hope that this gives you some food for thought, and I'm happy to exchange some ideas with you. Thank you.
We still have some room for some questions.
Yeah. Thanks.
I wondered what are the implications of your study for the size of cities? Because if I saw it correctly, one of also the statistical significant variables in your analysis was also the size of municipalities.
Yes. Yeah.
Namely that you are more advanced in this respect if the city is bigger.
Yeah.
Does that also implicate that cities should grow in order to be able to implement these kind of tools?
Yeah. So we do find that actually larger cities tend to have more advantages in adopting these tools because they have more capacity, they have more funds to invest in new hardware and hire new people. So size does matter. However, for mid-sized cities, what we have found is that that's why I think the Work City Network is very important. So the Johnson County project is a good example. A lot of them are small-sized cities, mid-sized cities in the US setting at least. Compared to European cities, maybe they are small. So a lot of those cities are like 70,000, 100,000. And then, but if you combine them together, it's about 500,000, right? And so if they collaborate and share resources and say, oh, no, we are going to actually put together the IT platform and you just contribute data into that, that will help resolve some of the capacity constraint. And so this is what the Johnson County project is about actually. Is using that platform to kind of do a pilot to see to what extent we could actually harness the data from different jurisdictions together and do the big data together. So small cities, if they do the collaborative management more and more effectively, I think that will help. Yeah. The size does matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just gave some beautiful examples of how what are the current projects in the States. Are they also public? So is that information also shared with all the
Yeah, about citizens, yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. So for the Kansas City project, we actually work with the local officials to get the data and then actually analyze the result. And we actually present that in public hearings and public meetings. And for the Johnson County project, we actually we just finished it. And so we are now in the process of going through the report stage. But at some point, again, we'll go to the elected officials and present it publicly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Actually, I believe you ended with the vital question about getting social science theory involved in these things. Now, in the old days, I would say, we started out with the policy theory and looked at the data to either confirm or reject our hypothesis. Now, in these kind of processes, actually, the system may develop a new hypothesis or so.
Yes.
When you look at creation of policies, thinking of how are there examples of policy departments in cities who actually have integrated this in a meaningful way in their processes? Are the new processes evolving? Because if you miss out on an independent variable, you have large consequences as you showed. Are there any good examples of movement in that direction, looking differently at how data influence policy?
Right. No, that's actually a very good question. So going back to the original your question about this big debate whether actually now we could drop the it's not no more is it inductive logic or deductive logic kind of thing, right? And so my argument is a cycle. Some of my I think the early days of big data thinking, oh, you don't need theories anymore. It's all about data. So you have data and we'll come up with what's going on, and then you can think about theories and patterns. But it's all about data, right? I think now people start to realize that it's not possible. First of all, how you interpret data have to have some theoretical perspective. Secondly, I think there are a lot of limits. Now we start to realize there are a lot of limits to the data. That you need to think about where the data are coming from, what you're missing, and some of the theories actually are very important. And also, a lot of the social science research may not be using big data, but they may be using small data, but small data actually could be really good. And I'll give you a really good example. This is actually, I have constant debate with my computer science friends. So in the big data world, they love social media stuff, Twitter data, right? Because it's fancy, it's complicated. You have to do all this text mining, sentiment analysis, so this fancy stuff, right? No one could do it, I could do it, you cannot do it, so I'm good, right? You are no good. But that kind of thing. Well, it's all good, right? Big data, right? So they publish it and all kinds of papers. Well, in Kansas City, they said, we don't believe in that. We do random citizen survey. Every quarter, we survey 1,000 citizens. So there's some of the Kansas City project that we use. We have about 13,000 citizen survey data over several years because they survey quarterly random citizens. And they said, from our data, we find that only about 15–20% of citizens use social media. And indeed, it's also confirmed by the Pew Charitable Trust national analysis. The people who really use Twitter data are 18 to 35 years old, highly educated. So when you use social media and use it to say this is what people are thinking about or this is what policy should be thinking, well, you're missing a lot of people. But it's big data, but it's not comprehensive representative data. And so there's a danger. And so sometimes you do need to have small data to help the big data and think about it. And so in some of our work, we now start to combine this. So we are actually doing the social media data now. We are actually mining some of the social media discussion, but also comparing that with the citizen survey data to see, well, what are the gaps? What do people talk about in the social media world that is not talked about in the random survey, so that we find out what people are not thinking about and where's the gap. And so again, the social science field, I think, still could contribute a lot. And I'm working with a lot of computer scientists now, a few computer scientists who actually are open to the idea that maybe they should work with social scientists. And so those people are hard to come by. And I think having that interdisciplinary team together is very important. So going back to Martin's your question, I think it's a great question. I think there are several ways to solve that problem. One is that, first of all, the city, if I were the government official, I'd say if I have a grant to give out the big data project, I will actually mandate or require that if I give you the money, yeah, you do all these algorithm, computer science folks, good. I need to have a social science person to be there to actually think about those issues. So build the interdisciplinary team. Secondly, I think the open data is also another good possibility because there are so many ways to cut the data. So one team may look at it this way, the other team may look at it the other way. And so how you work with the university to incentivize them, tell them, hey, the data are available now. Which students want to use it, and they are all there. And so I think will allow you to have that discussion dialogue. So some cities are doing much better. That partnership between university and city, of course, are not easy, but I think it could be done.
I think a lot of data is not uniform. You just explain all the different variables if you look at data. But if you look at those projects, if you just stand aside and look at that, then it's really strange that one local government has developed this and the other doesn't use it. How do you see that?
Yeah.
Because a lot of things, like the weather, is uniform.
Right. So you mean why local governments some of them are doing more, some of them are doing less?
Yeah, why don't we use each other's knowledge to
Yeah, exactly.
To learn from each other,
right.
to use them.
So this is why I think the big data world, the new institutional logic really is exactly about that. Let's share the knowledge, let's share our know-how, let's share the data, so that we could then mine the data together. So I think that we're getting there, but a lot of times it's still a traditional departmental
Politics.
thinking. Yeah, politics also to a extent, because they are accountable to their own elected officials with a boundary. Yeah. But the problems are not boundary focused, right? So crime problems do not stay in my city. Criminals don't just, I just did crime in this area and I will just stop there, right? So they spread. And so how do we actually get these officials and citizens work together is very important. And we haven't solved that issue. And so I think, going back to more theoretical, I think with the data that we got, I think there may be some new thinking about organizational theories in the government. I mean, the traditional organizational theory is still very departmental driven.
Yeah.
But if you actually look at some of the big data, it could be really fluid. Maybe your department should organize in the summer this way, but in the springtime it should be organized completely different teamwork. And so we are working on that kind of fluid boundary of departmental teamwork. So there may be some new thinking behind that that would incentivize collaboration.
Yeah, you started with looking back and you say, in the last 5 to 10 years, a lot of things changed. If you look forward and say, okay, what's your vision? How does the world, at least the US states, look in for example, 10 years?
Yeah. So I will, well, I mean, some of the challenges I think will be important, but how you set the boundary. I think President Obama some years ago actually set a very wise saying. He said, what could be done doesn't mean what should be done. So how you set the boundary, I think we haven't wrestled that clearly, and we need to wrestle that. I think we are really getting to in the coming 10 years, I think it's really interesting because with the big data, different countries have different contexts. So we have some projects in China, etc. The true big data country is China. They got everything. I mean, they have video camera. In fact, I don't know whether you heard the story. You know, one guy robbed a person in Beijing and what a tourist or something. Within 30 minutes, that guy was caught. 30 minutes. There's no way you could escape in China. Right? Because the video camera everywhere, right? So they rob it, where's it? They just trace back the video and then exactly know where the guy have gone and then caught within 30 minutes. So again, now is that the society we want or is that the society we're proud of? That is another major issue. But again, if you actually think about that world, right, that's one world. Also, if you actually think about another governance world, is we could have so much data on individuals, all the way to your genetic composition, to your cell, to your health, right? Then the question is, now if I want to set health policies, the insurance company, the med hospital, all these have a lot of data. To what extent we want to harness data, but then drill down to the individual, talk about future. Right now, technology-wise, we could now predict the health risk of individual because of the genetics. But do you want that or do you not want that? And who should do it? Should it be the insurance company doing it or should the government? Why the government? Or should it be individual making the decision? That big data world or policy boundary has not been resolved easily yet, and I think we're getting there. So within the coming 10 years, I think the technologies will be so advanced, the AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning is so good, but the social science policy side have to catch up with that, and we are not there yet. Thank you.
Unfortunately, we have to finish this interesting discussion, but perhaps we can continue with it during lunch. So you're all invited to get lunch here just outside the room. So thank you very much, Professor Ho.
Thank you.